Thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm Ann Petrick, Senior Director of Research for VISTAGE, joined by Joe Galvin, our Chief Research Officer. And today we're happy to host the latest webinar in our Leading in Challenging Times series. This series provides the definitive source of thought leadership on pressing topics facing small and mid-sized businesses. Today, we'll delve into the findings of our latest research report for SMBs, Decision Factors that CEOs Climb to Recovery. We'll share the impact of the coronavirus and the pandemic on small and mid-sized businesses over time. Then we'll delve into the key factors you must consider to make strategic decisions in these uncertain times. We'll focus specifically on how to best manage customers, talent, finances, and operations, as well as the top challenges you're facing as a leader to ensure your business is well positioned for future success. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Ann. Welcome, everyone. Each fall, in the fall here in North America, we create decision factors as a way to provide some guidance to our CEOs based on the research and data we accumulate to help them understand what they need to consider as they make decisions they move into strategic planning. Before we start, I'd like to invite you to connect with both Ann and I on LinkedIn or follow us on Twitter as we post content most every day. It's really about the power of perspective. In fact, it was May 29, 1863, a pivotal day in military history, because it was the first time, 1862, was the first time that hot air balloons had been used to provide perspective. No longer obscured by trees or hills, observers in the sky could provide commanders down below with an unprecedented perspective of the battle raging in front of them. Fast forward to today, and the KH-11 spy satellite orbits 200 miles above the Earth, providing insight and intelligence to the degree it can read license plates of cars moving down a highway. It's the power of perspective that we seek to provide at VISTAGE Research. We aspire to become your most trusted resource for research, data, and expert perspectives on the issues, topics, and decisions of business optimization and leadership enhancement. Our sole goal is to create a layer of insight, a perspective, if you will, above the level of the group, combining the insights that we get from all the members that participate in our surveys. And I'd like to thank each of our members who do and have contributed in our surveys throughout the year and throughout the pandemic. It's really an interesting thing, this thing called the coronavirus. Until they were discovered in Western Australia in 1697, it was widely believed there was no such thing as a black swan. It was a common phrase in medieval London. But we now know that a black swan event has three criteria. One, it was completely unforeseen and unforecastable. Two, it has a profound and lasting impact on people. And three, in retrospect, maybe we should have seen it coming. Well, there's no question that no one saw this coming a year ago this time. It has had and will have a profound and lasting effect on all of us. And having seen enough of the pandemic movies, we probably should have expected this to come, right?
Great, Joe. So looking at our data, like you mentioned, thank you to everyone who shared your insights. And let's look back over time at our CEO Confidence Index and what that told us. And after seeing 7 consecutive quarters of decline across 2017, 2018, 2019, that was a deceleration of growth that we were seeing. Everyone was growing, but just not as fast. But then in our Q4 survey last December, we saw an uptick. And for the first time, confidence was projected to climb, and that was supposed to continue into 2020. We were projecting that to continue, and there was going to be an acceleration of growth, and we were going to see and return to prosperity. In fact, based on our findings in that Q4 survey, we created a report that we were going to share with our VISTAGE community throughout the year about projections and returning to prosperity with the key decisions and the investments, the priorities you needed to think about to be able to maximize this acceleration of growth. But much like your strategic plans got moved to a certain file, our report got moved to trash very quickly as it became very irrelevant as the pandemic started. In fact, our Q1 survey was in the field March 2nd through 9th. I want you to think about what was happening March 2nd through 9th. In the beginning of that week, coronavirus felt really far away, but by the end of that survey, March 9th, that's when we saw the stock market crash, the second stock market crash. Now, our Q1 survey, the index didn't accurately capture everything because things were changing so quickly. But then when we look at our Q2 survey that was conducted in June, that was in the middle of this pandemic shutdown related black swan induced recession. And we saw that confidence plummeted. Now, much like many of you might have pivoted how you engage with your customers, we changed our survey cadence from quarterly to monthly during the pandemic to be able to track the impact. And we're going to share some of that with you today. If we'd actually calculated that index back through all of those months, we would have seen the actual low occur in April. But from 65.5, we found in our most recent confidence index survey conducted in September that we nearly recovered every that loss, and that we're starting to see confidence return. And that is what led us to our decision factors. We've been sharing this with our VISTAGE members at our VISTAGE Executive Summits, and is the foundation of our latest report. And I mentioned we pivoted some of how we engage with you as VISTAGE members and small and mid-sized business leaders through the pandemic, going from big reports like this to quarterly, more frequent blogs that we share via the VISTAGE Research Center. So creating monthly reports to understand the impacts, engaging with experts across the VISTAGE community to bring you key insights to help you navigate these uncertain times. And we're going to be referencing a lot of the work that we've done through the pandemic throughout this presentation today. So I encourage you to visit the Research Center to be able to go deeper into some of the insights we're sharing today.
To try to make sense of all this, we created something we call the Corona curve. The Corona curve is simply an inverted bell curve, but what it looks at is business activity, which is not just revenue, but all the energy that goes on with the business over time to try to make sense of what we were experiencing. There was a trigger event that happened sometime in December, November, maybe January, who knows, over in China. And we started to hear about it, but we moved into denial and mentioned our Q1 survey in March. Only 15% of our members were extremely concerned about this in early March. And then very quickly, we had that trigger event of the market crash. It was March 2, March 4, March 9. And quickly we realized something was going on. And we were going to a bad place that we didn't know. We were searching for the bottom. And when we got there very quickly in early April, we moved into a survival mode. Is this the end? Is this the bottom? What will this mean? And then we moved into something we call the pause, which was that April, May period of time through, call it Memorial Day, maybe a little bit past that for some, where we were just waiting at the bottom and trying to learn more, trying to understand what this would mean, what the impact would be to us. And then we started looking for signs of life. What is it that's going on out there that we could see that would maybe give us some belief that we were starting to now climb out of the Corona curve and begin to return back? I'd ask you this question. To what degrees have your revenues been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic? Now you're thinking about that in terms of where you are today, but we've been asking this question since April. It's really interesting to see, if you look at, we'll just focus here on the no change or increase. Gray is April, May is the gold, if you will. May surveys, we always do our surveys at the beginning of the month, so the May survey captured April sentiment. But you can see how we very quickly, in terms of no change increase, we hit bottom in May, and then we began that long, steady climb. The last column you'll see, the dark gold, is November. And you see we've kind of reached a flat spot here over the last couple months, call it a pause, if you will, in our climb out of the Corona curve. Some of that driven by the increased caseload, some of it driven by just all the uncertainty that's going on and around us. But you can see that today, over a third, 36% of our members are no change or increase, up from a bottom of 15. If we look on the other end of the spectrum, you'll see again improvement, but still 17% here in November have decreased 25% more in revenue. It's only 1 or 2% that are beyond, call it 75%, the revenues are down. But you can see how this shows how the movement of revenues, as we've begun this climb, we've seen these signs of life going back to May and June, and we've made this progress up the curve. Next now is this concept of rebooting. You know, now that we believe that we found the bottom and we're starting our climb out, how do we reboot our business? How do we adapt? How do we change? For some who happen to be in the right verticals at the right time, business is booming, it's prospering. For others who are struggling, maybe they're down 10% or 25% or more, representing almost 2/3 of our community now and closer to 85% going back to May. How do you reboot your business? Well, it's interesting, we asked this question going back to May. Have you made any changes in the products or services you offer as a result of the pandemic? Have you made any changes? Have you made any adaptations? And what we found were 47% of our members had made changes, this was back into May, to what they offered. And what was really interesting, of that 47%, right, 49% of those are going to maintain those and keep those after the pandemic. 29% temporarily pivoted. But you can see here as we begin to reboot our business to try to understand how we can survive, how we can capitalize, maybe how we can just get through this, the resiliency of our membership and our CEOs to adapt and change to this shifting environment. Next, we move now to rebuild. You know, we have this concept not to repair, but to rebuild. Repair means you're going to fix it to what it was. Rebuild means you're going to create something better. And that's clearly what's needed as we move into this environment. It has to be different because it'll be a different environment when we get there. As part of that rebuild was the financial implications of this. So what programs do you have or do you plan to leverage for your business? And you can see in many of us participated in the Paycheck Protection Program, 82%. Now, if you recall back to our data from May, 15% were no change or better, which connects pretty well to this 82%. Of the 82% that applied, 98% were funded. So we got this infusion of cash that allowed us to rebuild. PPP was a highly successful program. We then move on to recover. Now that we've rebooted, we rebuilt, and we begin to recover, what does that mean? And this is an interesting question because this looks forward. Do you anticipate your sales revenues, your firm's revenues will increase, remain the same, or decrease during the next 12 months? And you can see again, as we go down the Corona curve, and as we start to come up, you can see that steady improvement in terms of where people think their revenues will be in the next year. But once again, we see here in November, the flat spot, really September, October, November, we've kind of leveled out, meaning we've reached as far as we can get at this point when it comes to climbing out of the Corona curve. We still have got over 10 or 11 million people unemployed. We're going through the second or third wave, depending upon where you are. And while there's good news on the horizon in terms of the vaccine and the vaccine's availability, we've got a long, dark winter here to get through. And that's what our data shows, and that's what our members are pausing at this level of that return. But what it leads us to, which is really powerful, is this concept of the new reality. Once we get to the other side, which I think now is going to be mid-year next year, or maybe a little bit beyond, it's not going to be a new normal or the next normal because there'll be nothing normal about it. It'll be a new reality. We started talking about the new reality back in April because there's some fundamental change. First is work from home, and we'll talk about this a couple times during the course of our conversation today. But it's clear the genie's out of the bottle on this. I've had the good fortune to work from home for the last 10 or 12 years, and it was always my secret little perk. But now everyone's adapted to this work from home environment, and it will become not an option, but a requirement for many, especially emerging generations, the millennials and the X's. They're looking for this, and we'll all find some hybrid solution to what work from home will look like when we get to the other side. Think about technology adoption and utilization. We've seen 15 years of behavior change in just 30 days. Think about the ability that you have to function in a Zoom call or virtual or all the things that we've changed. 15 years of behavior change in just 30 days. It's all about this new reality that we're moving to. We talked about work from home, but now it's tele-everything, telemedicine, telebanking, tele-whatever. We're doing telebusiness. We've adapted to that. Business travel will recover, but it'll never be the same, right? Are we still going to jump on a plane and fly to Chicago for one meeting and fly back when we can do that virtually? Now, of course, you have to have relationships in place. Business travel won't be eliminated, but it'll take a different level of justification in order to do that. Where you have relationships in place, you can capitalize on that. No touch transactions. Everywhere you go, you don't want to touch things today in the Corona world. Well, that's going to perpetuate as we go forward. I've had an Apple Watch and the ability to use Apple Pay for years, and I've never done it until now. Why? Because when I do enter an environment like that, I don't want to be touching stuff. I'd rather do it in a no-touch way. And finally, and probably most effectively, is digital transformation. The organizations that we've seen that were further along when it came to digital transformation have done better. Digital transformation is a word and a phrase that's been out there for a long time, and some people have taken it seriously and other people haven't. But this clearly has accelerated and will accelerate the digital transformation, not just in terms of our individual skills, think of how you develop, but organizational agility. The movement towards the digital infrastructure is only going to accelerate and is only going to advance as we move forward. We published this report a year ago this time on digital transformation. We invite you to download it, but it talks about the importance of this transformation that we have to go through and what that will mean. And then, of course, it's the great business reboot. It's a chance for you to rethink, reimagine, and rebuild your business. As we come out of this, reestablishing a new business baseline of where you are in COVID in terms of your revenues, your finances, your cash flow, your employees, all those concepts that come together that define what you are and the business that you're in. And that's why it's so hard to be a CEO, because there's so many decisions that we have to make. CEOs are in the business of making decisions. And this is the most unstable, uncertain economy for decision making and strategic planning that CEOs have experienced in a decade. And I would argue that it's even more uncertain than the Great Recession, because this is driven by a health crisis. The health crisis is what's driving the economic crisis. In the Great Recession, that was all about financial mechanics, right? This is a recession that is driven by a health crisis. And unless or until we solve the health crisis, we won't be able to solve the economic crisis, which makes decision making so hard right now. We asked this question in September. What is currently the biggest business challenge that you face? Think about that. What are the biggest challenges that you're facing right now? Well, one, we found that the talent wars in those markets, in those segments, in those verticals, the talent wars are back on. Finding, recruiting, hiring, dealing with work from home, maintaining culture and retention. The talent wars are back on, and talent is back to the top of the big challenges. Customers, with revenues down, what we've seen is, I call it the big slowdown. Sales cycles are longer, deal sizes are smaller, and it's harder to get people to engage. Prospects don't return calls like they used to. The inability to travel has prevented selling in many environments. It's suffered, especially when you're trying to sell to new people, and this concept of virtual selling. It's been a very political time. It's been a very volatile political time, as we all know. And it's interesting because that volatility, when this was taken in September, we had people that looked at this and say, depending upon who you supported, it was the best or worst possible outcome and everything in between. Our community represents, I think, the broader American community, and there's people on the extremes and there's a lot of people in the middle, and we're all trying to figure out what this political volatility means, right? The reduced revenue have driven new rules. Revenue is what revenue is, and we have to be able to manage to that. That's why the importance of the great slowdown is so important, but being able to manage the revenue is driving our decision making. And then, of course, it's uncertainty. Uncertainty is what underscores everything that we do. It's the great unknown. It's the volatility and the uncertainty of the corona crisis, and why that makes everything so much harder. And that's why these business challenges are so important, and it's so critical that CEOs be able to make those decisions.
Thanks, Joe. Well, speaking of decisions, we're going to now talk about the decision factors you need to consider to maximize recovery. And we're going to use our decision model as a lens for you. And the decision model starts with you in the center as a leader, the attributes, behaviors, the competencies you need as a leader to lead through these uncertain times. Followed by leadership. What are the processes and frameworks that you use as you guide your organization through these times? And finally, business optimization. What are some of the tactics that you put in place in different areas to be able to optimize your business to maintain that business activity that we looked at as increasing on the corona curve? So we'll start with our business decision factors and specifically talent management. And the decision factor here is maintaining workforce engagement. Now, we've seen through this time how important it is to engage with your employees, and thinking back to those early days, and even today as uncertainty continues to be a theme, it is so important for you as a leader to create clarity. Creating that clarity, because when you don't create clarity, people start telling themselves their own story. So think about how you're communicating with transparency. What is the latest update? What is your vision? What are we doing? And with frequency, because with no story, again, people make up their own story. Now, what we saw through the pandemic is that many of our members found culture carry themselves through this, and it's necessary to refine and nurture that culture. And think about all of the components there are to your culture. Now, we asked in our May survey about culture and how it carried through the pandemic. And we found that 60% said culture is critical to performance and success. 56% said it was a priority, and 43% strongly agreed that they're satisfied with the strength of the culture. Now, this is an increase from when we surveyed our members on culture before. We found that just 11% were satisfied with the strength of their culture. So this means employees and the culture rose to the top and really helped carry businesses through the pandemic and some of these trying times. And why culture is important is because it's part of your organizational gravity. When you think about how you engage with your employees, your culture is what's going to hold the good people that you need today. We've seen so many people rise to the top, and these are the A players that you want to keep on board and engage because they're necessary for recovery. Now, the culture is also going to repel the bad. We've also seen people crack under the pressure of the pandemic, and certainly those are people that are you want to think about how you exit them out of your organization, because now is a great time to think about how you're going to attract new talent that you're going to need for recovery. And this is the foundation of our report, where we talked about creating a conscious culture and some of the components of that. And culture is really built on a foundation of trust. That's the foundation of your culture. So when you think about how you're creating clarity, your communications, the transparency, that's creating that trust that's foundational to your culture. Now, when we look at the next level, it's defined by different elements. And really think about the values of your organization, and they manifest themselves in different ways with different language and communication, behaviors and rituals. And what we find that through the pandemic, your values and your behaviors might have changed, but the things that you needed to reimagine were those rituals and traditions. So the same technology that enables the collaboration and the communication is the same technology that's going to enable you to reimagine those rituals and traditions. Your all hands meetings where you might gather together, or your Friday donut meetings now can happen in a virtual environment. The training that took place in a classroom now can come into a virtual environment like this as well. The next layer is bound to the business. Your culture is bound to your business by your mission and your vision. And that shouldn't have changed, but maybe how you're engaging and how you're going to get there is changed. Because ultimately, at the center of your culture is your purpose. And this is all powered by purpose. What do you exist to do? Because likely that hasn't changed. How you actually engage with your customers and what your purpose is might have changed, but your purpose is front and center, and you need to be communicating that. And that's all part of the report that we created called Creating a Conscious Culture. And we had our speaker, Gustavo Grodnitsky, come and talk about how culture trumps everything. So if you haven't had the opportunity to download this report, this can help you think about your culture, because that's something that's going to continue to carry you through this crisis. Okay, so coming back to some of the decision factors around maintaining workforce engagement, also now's the time to prioritize diversity and inclusion. And certainly that is part of your culture. We had Aisha Tompkins from Insperity come and talk to us about implicit bias in your organization back in September. And fascinating webinar about how all the different ways that implicit bias manifests itself, and help you identify where you might have that bias and help you address some of the tensions. Because part of the pandemic, unfortunately, we've also seen social injustice issues rise to the top. So prioritizing and addressing that with your employees, because that's all part of the uncertainty that is creating some challenges today. And Aisha said, I'm sure you've read this or heard this, that diversity is inviting someone to a party versus inclusion is asking them to dance. So it's not enough to be hiring diverse employees, but think about how you're going to incorporate their perspectives as you start to maximize recovery. Because the final point about maintaining workforce engagement is the opportunity today to upgrade talent. Now we're seeing the unemployment numbers come down, but now is not the time to hang on to those subpar employees. Those subpar employees that hopefully your culture is repelling, they're the ones who are creating a burden on the people that you want to keep today. So think about how you're going to create the workforce for your future. Now is a great time to upgrade the talent, and that's what drove the top business challenge that Joe just shared with you about the talent wars reigniting. So your employees are looking for a stable environment where they can productively contribute. So removing those subpar employees that are creating a burden on them is important, and bringing people in that are going to be part of your future is our last part of how you can maintain workforce engagement today. Joe, over to you.
Yeah, if we jump next to customer management, it's really about adapting to changing customer needs. It's always about buying behaviors, and just as your behaviors have changed, your customers' behaviors have changed. So it raises a question of how do you adapt your sales approach to those changing customer needs? And in my background, I started in sales and have sold through a number of recessions. And I'll tell you this, it is always the right answer, irregardless of economies, to get close to your customer. That's always the right answer. But now more so than ever, because it's your existing customers that are the foundation of your revenues. We know that revenues and growth are high on the issues of concerns and challenges, but getting closer to your customers is what matters most. Working with them and helping them solve their problems. Understanding the challenges of your customers and your customers' customers. The way you treat them today during the pandemic will be rewarded or punished when we get to the other side, right? You think about it, they may stay with you now, but if you haven't treated them right, well, when things stabilize and we get to that new reality, they may choose to look at someone else. And that's why it's so important that you focus first and foremost on your customers, because the right answer is always to get closer to your customers. And as I said, talking about customers will reward or punish, this is a great time to connect and try to connect to those competitive accounts you've always wanted, right? Maybe they're not getting treated so well. Maybe your competitors are struggling more than you are. Maybe they're having different types of problems because they're not as far down the digital transformation path that you are. Now is the time to approach them, understand their challenges, and present the alternative, how you can be a better solution for them going forward. You also have to think about the messages that you're delivering. What we were talking about to customers a year ago this time, well, that doesn't connect to anything. A year ago this time, we were feeling that the slowdown was slowing. We felt that 2020 was going to be a great year for growth, and we were going to have a chance to really go out and sell these positive messages of increase and improvements and getting better. Well, now the messages have to change. It has to be much more about careful and handling objections and making sure that you're not going to fall into a trap. You have to change your message because what your customers are listening for is something different. And it's always a great time to not just sharpen your sales skills and processes, but they need to adapt, right? The skills that are important now, like negotiation, ROI selling, reference selling, things that you can do as your salespeople can do to alleviate concern, to minimize risk, are all things that your customers are going to connect with. And also, as activity is slowing, it's a great time to invest in building those skills and developing those skills and sharpening those skills. Every professional sports team goes through a spring training and they have practices. Why? Because they're always about sharpening, building, and developing skills, and your sales team is no different. We're working on a report right now called Developing a World-Class Sales System. What does a sales system look like for you to be able to build and create for you? And just as a precursor to that, we'll share a little bit of it with you today, and that is it always starts with the customer. Everything that you do in terms of selling has to be with the customer at the core. It has to be about what customers need, what they want, what they're looking for. It's important for you to understand who your customer is. Is it a single decision or multiple decision maker environment? What is it they're looking for? What are the alternatives? How do you connect and understand your customer? It's defining how your customers buy, because it's how your customers buy that will dictate the sales process that you can replicate that will drive success. Once you understand your customer, it's now about the salesperson. How does the salesperson align to how your buyers buy? What are the skills they need? What's the process they need? What's the knowledge that they need? How does that salesperson connect to the customer? And it has to connect to them in a way that you can afford. I mean, you can't put a dedicated full-time professional enterprise level salesperson on someone spending $10,000 a year. There's different types of salespeople that have to align to different types of customers based on how you want to and how you can afford to connect to them. Once you understand that, it's now about sales leadership. For some folks, they're looking at hiring their first salespeople. For others, it's, do I go from a sales manager to a sales leader? But as a sales leader has the responsibility of driving performance and execution, to function as a coach, to function as a mentor, to function as a taskmaster, to be able to create the strategy, build the metrics, to do all those leadership activities. Your best salespeople are not necessarily going to be your best sales leaders, and that's just a proven fact. And then finally, sales support. How much do you invest in training? Do you provide your salespeople with a sales technology, either to manage contacts or a more elaborate CRM system? This is how we empower the sales professional and how we give the sales professional the ability to go do their job, because whether you provide it or not, they will have to go and find that. Whether you have a marketing function or your product function can share with them features, capabilities, or messages, salespeople will create that on their own, or you can provide that support. Our concept is by developing your sales system and using a consistent lens to look at, understand, and evaluate your salespeople and your sales organization, you'll be able to make consistent, graduated, and measured changes driven by data, insight, and performance. And we'll have this out to you in January. We're really excited about it.
Great, thanks, Joe. And now we're talking about operations, our next decision factor. And we've talked a lot about technology, but now we're going to share building the infrastructure for the new workplace, because there have been a lot of changes. We talked about work from home, but we know from our survey that 42% have started returning employees to the office. And so thinking about how you can reimagine that workplace. Back in May, we asked what are the components of your return to work plans, and found that there were many different things that we shared as a checklist to think about as you return to work. Now, many are choosing to continue to remote work. We have a certain percentage that are planning to stay at home until the end of 2020, returning in 2021. Others are still uncertain. But as you reimagine the workforce, the top thing to think about from our data showed policies. When you think about the new policies you need to put in place, all of the things to keep people safe in terms of how you report any sort of workplace exposure, what are the safety standards and requirements for PPP, health checks, how do you handle remote and at-risk workers, putting policies in place that are scalable so you don't have to address every situation differently. So 80% said new policies were part of the return to work plans. Now around that, you also have to think about the physical office and how you have to re-engineer that. And the next highest part of the return to work plans was the sanitization, the cleaning. Although just this week we're hearing that that is not as critical, as it's more airborne than surface driven. But it's so important to address that, and because not only are you trying to keep employees physically safe, but you're also trying to make them feel emotionally and psychologically safe. So 77% said that upgrading cleaning and sanitization was part of the plan. And then you think about, now that we know that it's airborne, how important it is to make sure that people stay separate. How do you change directions and keep fewer employees in the workplace at the same time? How do you reconfigure your desks? And what kind of air filtration systems now do we need to think about until the vaccine is put in place? But another key point that when you think about reimagining the workforce and the workplace is the need to appoint and empower leaders. So certainly your return to work plans involve HR, as there's policies and people, and it involves finance, as a lot of these things that you need to do to retrofit your workplace have costs associated with them. Also operations, because they're responsible for actually physically carrying out these workplace changes. But the advice that we got from Joel Greenwald, who is a speaker, VISTAGE speaker around legal things, he said the one important thing is to have someone that's appointed as a chief safety officer. Now, this could be a temporary appointment or something that's more permanent, but this chief safety officer is responsible for coordinating across all those functions, from HR to finance to operations, to make sure the plans are put in place and they're compliant with the latest guidelines, that they're actually implemented and executed, and giving some level of accountability. So think about who is driving how you're reimagining your workplace. And some of this is shared in our most recent research report, Future of Work in America, which is a collaboration with VISTAGE speaker Mark Emmer as well. So I encourage you to download that from our research center.
That takes us to financials. And clearly, as you've seen through the corona curve and the revenues and the expectations, the cash runway has become really critical for people to be able to survive, for some to survive, for some to thrive. But cash is oxygen to the business. We asked this question, and we've been asking this question: how long will your cash reserves support your business during the current economic conditions? And some really interesting data here, because you can see from April on the left, as we move from 1 to 5, 6 to 12, and more than a year, you can see how shortly after June, shortly in June and beyond, how that really improved. And that was a result of the PPP program. Again, 82% of our members engaged in that program. And despite some of the early confusion and chaos that was with it, we're able to connect to a big bank or a local bank and get that funding. And you can see how that's impacted cash flow, and you can see the improvement as we got to more than a year from April to November as cash flows improved. Part of that, of course, is driven by the improving revenues that we've seen as people have moved to the other side in our chart about revenues. But it's clear the PPP program had a big impact on it. We asked this question because once you get the money, now do you expect it to be forgiven? And when we asked this question in August, 55% said, yeah, I think I'll get it all back. 35% said, yeah, I'll get most of it back. And 10% weren't so sure. And that's where we are today, is whether you're in the 8-week or the 26-week program, it's the forgiveness that's going on now. And this was an interesting question. We asked, if you received a PPP loan, what's the status of your funds? Again, we asked this in August, and you could see 74% had already used it, and everybody was going to be used up by the end of the year. Well, we know that these programs are going to come to an end here at the end of the year. We know that given the current state of where we are in transition politically, as well as the divided government we have between the right and the left, the likelihood of a stimulus package coming out is uncertain at this point. And then what it would be and what size it would be and what that might mean, we just don't know. It may not happen until we get the other side of the inauguration, who knows. But in the meantime, the process has to begin for people to begin the forgiveness provision. Some have already done it, but there's a couple things that we've learned. We recently did a webinar with Matt Garrett, one of our speakers who we've worked with multiple times during the course of this, focused on PPP. What we've learned is, one, be patient, right? Be patient in terms of there's no rush to repay this. There's no rush to apply. Two is to work directly with your banker. Work directly with your banker, because that's who issued the loan, and that's who's going to have to meet up with the SBA when the time comes for accounting. And always make sure that you can justify the decisions you've made and you've maintained good accounting, and then everything else will fall into place. But it's clear that PPP had a great impact. It's clear that now the forgiveness issue is kicking in. But what's even greater concern is, as we go through the balance of this crisis, that that there may or may not be another stimulus program down the road, and that's going to impact cash flow, and that's going to be a really tough situation for many of our folks. And that leads us to this segment, which is, what's the most significant leadership challenge you're facing right now? We asked this question. We asked this question to understand, as a leader, what is it that's most important? What's the biggest challenge you're facing? And I think as leaders, we all need to think about and understand what that might mean and what that means to each of us in terms of what's important to you. So let's focus just on leadership. And it was interesting enough, the top response was morale, keeping people focused, preventing burnout. Executive burnout, employee burnout was one of the things we heard a lot about. And it's really clear, because this has been extremely stressful and challenging for everyone. The fear and the uncertainty as we were coming down the corona curve, the darkness of the pause as we waited it out, and now as we take the long, slow climb out, it's taken a toll on each of us. For many, they're juggling, children working from home or managing and taking care of elderly parents. Morale was the top issue about how do you keep people motivated and engaged. It's your people and your culture that held you through the downfall, through the pause, and on the climb up. And it's maintaining morale that was the big issue. The new workplace, you just heard Ann talk about that, and we've got some great research for you on that. But adapting to this new workforce, and it's providing safety on all levels, physical, emotional, and psychological, that we all feel safe to work. We feel safe coming back to work. We feel that we're working in an environment that we can be comfortable working in, because if I'm worried about the physical safety, if I'm worried about the emotional safety, or if I'm worried about some of the other issues, I'm not going to be able to bring my best and be my best. Next, of course, is growth. And this has been the big issue, right? How do we grow? How do we get back to growing? How do we anticipate these new and unmet needs? We saw that we talked about business challenges. It was getting back to growth. It's how do we get back on the revenue train? How do we re-engage with our customers? If we have hit a pause or a flat stop or flat spot, or maybe even we take a step back as we get through this dark winter, how do we get back to growth? That's a leadership challenge, because we look at the spreadsheets, we do our reporting, and now, most importantly, we're trying to make plans for 2021. How do we plan for that? How do we get kicked in on that so that we can be in a position to return to growth? So that when the economic sun comes back out, when the vaccine starts to kick in, that we're first in line, that we can have our sales force and our marketing teams positioned, ready, and engaged to go out and capture that growth, to take advantage of your competitors, to understand new markets and new needs, but to get back to growth. And then finally, it's the uncertainty. It's uncertainty that has been and is driving everything. It's uncertainty about our own personal health and the health and safety of our family and our loved ones. It's concerns about our community. It's the uncertainty we have about this health crisis. We don't know, we still don't know so much. So much has improved. Our therapeutics have improved, the way we take care of people, even though, unfortunately, we see our case rates and our hospitalizations and our death rates growing up. Our healthcare system, their ability to treat people has radically improved. But our healthcare system is maxed out right now in many parts of the country and approaching it in others, and our healthcare workers are exhausted. That just adds to a deeper level of uncertainty and more uncertainty, making it even more challenging. And then, of course, on the business side, how do you plan in this shifting, uncertain COVID world? It's the uncertainty that we each feel as employees and as leaders that we have to adapt, and that's a challenge. But as a leader, you can't project uncertainty. As a leader, you have to present clarity. You have to create a voice. As Ann said, if you're not giving direction, if you're not saying this is where we are and this is where we're going, people will create stories to fill that gap. That's the reason why the Greeks and the Romans had myths to explain things that science wasn't in a position to define just yet. It is a huge leadership challenge to be able to eliminate that uncertainty as best you can, and to do that by consistent, clear communications. But when you look at these leadership challenges, you have to ask yourself, what are the challenges you're facing right now? And they're probably a combination of all of these, and maybe even a few more. But it's our abilities as leaders to rise up, to step up, and to make that difference with our employees and our business that will put us in the best possible position to ride out the balance of this pandemic, and then to be in a position to thrive in the new reality. And as we said earlier, the new reality will be different. It will require new skills. It will require a dependence on technology, but it will require first, foremost, and above all, outstanding leadership on your part.
So in the theme of pivoting your business to be able to meet some of your customers' needs during this time, the Leading in Challenging Times webinar series is something that VISTAGE offered our members through this time, and bringing in some of the most amazing speakers, from Patrick Lencioni to Jim Collins, Michael Bush from Great Place to Work, to be able to share some insights to help tackle these leadership challenges that Joe just shared. So before we leave you, I'm just going to pull some words of wisdom from these speakers that align with some of those challenges Joe just shared. And we'll start with morale. And as Joe just said, we've talked about creating clarity. Patrick Lencioni came and spoke to us in April, and he talked about the need to create clarity, but also to over-communicate it. During these times of uncertainty, you cannot over-communicate. And think about all the different channels of communication you have, from emails to texts to virtual meetings to recordings to your company intranet. Think about all the platforms and how you're leveraging them. He also spoke about getting really good at meetings. And that was when we were new to this platform. Everyone was learning Zoom. We were getting those individual skills down, and organizationally, how we keep our communication cadence. He talked a lot about defining the different kinds of meetings you need to have, from an update meeting to a task-related meeting to strategy meetings to update meetings. So getting really good at clarifying the different kinds of communications and meetings you need to have. And he also confirmed the belief that people will make up their own story if leadership does not tell the company story. So that was Patrick, and that really ties very back nicely to that leadership challenge of morale. Now, the next challenge is the new workplace. So we talked about the physical workplace, but really thinking about your new workplace is more than just what the physical manifestation is and how you're keeping people safe. Michael Bush, CEO of Great Place to Work for All, talked about making a great place to work for all in your company. And one of the things that he said that really resonated is those 3 levels of safety that you need to create. And why that's important is because when safety is compromised, that fear separates people into silos with similar fears. I want you to think back to all of the things that we've been through, whether it's fear about the coronavirus or social injustice or a very tenuous election season. There was a lot of fear, and there is a lot of fear, and it continues to separate people into silos. So as leaders, if you are addressing those fears and breaking down those silos, that will have an impact on your business, because those silos not only stop innovation, but also restrict growth. So think about the fears that your employees have about their job, about the business, about moving forward, and make sure you're addressing those as part of your new workplace. The next speaker we had, the next challenge was growth and moving ahead. And Lisa Bedell came and talked about keeping things simple during these times and thinking about growth. And the concept she talked about is killing your business. Another word for that is proactive obsolescence, which is a mouthful, so killing your business is a little easier off your tongue. But the idea behind that is to think about where you're most vulnerable. Where is your biggest weakness? Where could a competitor come in and kill your business? And if you identify that and address that, you can do it before it's done to you. So really being mindful about that, to look ahead and think more about who you're becoming. So many of you pivoted during this time to new products, but think more about who you're becoming. And finally, we had the great John Maxwell come and talk about uncertainty and how we all struggle through this, and what is the right message to give to employees and when. And some people waited for the perfect time or the perfect message, but they just want an authentic leader. That's what your employees need. John Maxwell said that uncertainty isn't the issue is actually clarity, going back to what Patrick Lencioni told us. And John shared ways to embrace the benefits of uncertainty, especially in the business. And what it does for leaders is that it gets you out of being automatic and makes you be more intentional. Again, thinking about who you're becoming rather than who you are today. So those are the experts that came and talked to us. And Joe, tell us about how uncertainty is going to continue.
Well, thanks, Anna. This leads to our last chart, and it's a really interesting one because we've been asking this question since March. When do you expect the economic conditions in the U.S. will begin to improve? And if you just pause and think about your own journey over this crazy pandemic experience that we're all going through, how that has vacillated and changed. And we thought it'd be really interesting to share that you can see, and I realize this chart, it doesn't provide great clarity, but if you look at the gray and you let your eyes relax, the left is good. It's we think in 3 to 5 months that it's going to get better, and to the right is bad, more than a year. And you can see in each one of these categories how we've slowly moved more and more conservative. That when you look out now to the final bar with the percentages, that's where we are in November. 9%. Now that's down from where we were over the last couple months. So we've stepped back a little bit. It's kind of same on 3 to 5. 6 to 12, it's down again a little bit, which is good. But as we get out to more than a year, it's back up to where it was. So what this suggests is great uncertainty. We really don't know when conditions across the U.S. will get good. We've seen data on revenues, we've seen data on cash flows, we've seen data on when you think your business will improve, all of those things. But when we look at the economy as a whole, it just underscores what we know, and that is that it's uncertainty. We really just don't know where this is going. And as I said, given where we are today in the middle of November, with the uncertain transition trying to happen, with the virus raging as it's never before raged, offset by the great news we're hearing from some of the pharmaceutical companies and the vaccines that will begin to roll out, there's reason to believe that we can begin to see it's the end of the beginning is really what the end of the beginning is what this is, and it's the start of the end. But we've still got to go through some pretty dark times, and it really suggests that we're at this fork in the road. And in the famous words of Yogi Berra, when you come to a fork in the road, you got to take it. It's clear that the pandemic and the disease itself is at a fork in the road. Will, in fact, the vaccines be as successful as the data is telling us that we are, or is it merely going to set us back some more, or not? We'll not be able to distribute them. Will the economy then recover, and the millions of people that are out of work and have been out of work, are they going to be able to get back to work, and we can return to that ability to engage in restaurants and bars and theaters and sporting events and our places of worship? We're at a fork in the road, both from an economic standpoint and from a health standpoint. Where we're not at a point in the road is as leaders. We have to lead. And again, we'll revert back to the words of John Maxwell, right? Every difficulty you face is a fork in the road, and you choose how you're going to approach that. You choose whether you're going to take the breakdown or a breakthrough. And now is a moment of choice. As we enter the holiday season, as we enter the longest, darkest winter any of us will know, it is incumbent upon us as leaders to lead, to reach out and address the morale issues that our people are feeling, to address their fears and concerns, to provide clarity, to provide a vision for where we're going, and not just to talk about it, but to back it up and to lead, because it's not what we say, it's what we do. And we each have a choice as leaders right here, right now, to provide that clarity, to provide that direction, knowing it may change, knowing it will adapt, and to put our own personal fears and uncertainties behind us and to lead, because that's what CEOs do. They're not just about making decisions, but they're leaders, and people will follow leaders. And I know that your people will follow you. That's why at VISTAGE Research, it's our goal to be the most trusted resource for research, data, and expert perspectives on the issues, topics, and decisions of business optimization and leadership enhancement. And I thank you for your time and attention today and the opportunity to share with you the work that Ann and I have been doing over the course of the year to try to understand what this crazy Corona thing is, and to hopefully give you the perspective that you can only get from us to help you make better decisions, become a better leader, and get better results.
Thank you, Joe. All of the insights that we shared with you today are available through the VISTAGE Research Center, the New Future of Work in America. That's our latest report, along with decision factors that this is based on. So really want to thank you for your time today. And we have a time for a few questions, Joe.
Oh boy.
Excellent. So one of the things that we talked about, and think about leaders and the uncertainty. Burnout while working from home is a hot topic in the media that everyone's reading about. And at first everyone found that there was increased productivity, and now they're starting to see that maybe this Groundhog Day experience that we have of walking down the hall is starting to have some impact. Do you have any strategies you might suggest for dealing with that with both your employees or yourself?
Yeah, I think we're all feeling it. I know I'm feeling this burnout. I was one of those folks that was on an airplane every week going to one of our executive summits somewhere, and I really fed on the energy of our members and being able to engage with our chairs, and that's evaporated. I think the press and the pressure and the stress that we all felt as we were coming down the Corona curve and through the pause, that grind really wore people down. And as hard as it is to survive that climb back up, it puts stress on everyone. And that's why we saw morale was such a big issue. But executive burnout, employee burnout, the pressure and the stress that we feel it everywhere. And so what are some of the strategies we see? Well, one is the clarity. And we heard that as a leader, our ability to provide clarity, direction, and a sense that we will get through this and we will get through this together. Two, to make sure we're running really good meetings. We heard that earlier too, that it's not just the traditional sit in a conference room and bang away, but that we try to find ways to have fun. We try to find ways to keep people light and engaged. One of the great challenges is if you bring in a new employee. Imagine being a new employee coming into a company and not being able to socially connect with people, because that's really how humans have to connect in that three-dimensional world. And eventually we'll get back to that, but in the meantime, that creates a real challenge. So addressing burnout, I think there's two key factors to it. One is acknowledging that it exists and acknowledging that it's okay to take a break. It's okay to say, I'm zoomed out today. I'm just going to have to step away for a minute, and giving people the space to do that. Recognizing that it's not just the stress at work, but it's the stress people feel at home. If they're trying to if they've got kids homeschooling on the other side of the house while they're trying to run a webinar, or if they've got aging parents and you're worried about Thanksgiving coming and what that's going to mean. It's important to recognize it and allow people space as to recognize that it's not going to change either. That between now and the time we get the vaccine and we feel comfortable to move, that this sense of burnout is going to exist. And I think more than anything, it's the culture that you have and the culture that you perpetuate that allows people to say it's okay to say, I need a mental health day. I need to step back, and that's okay, and that's not going to hurt your career, and we'll survive because we will. It's a really tough challenge that only the very best leaders are really cracking the code on right now, I think, Ann.
Yeah, I think to some of the VISTAGE member award winners, and I've had the opportunity to hear some of their stories, and there was one who said that he begins every day with 30 minutes of cardio. And so you think it's really easy to get into a bad routine. And myself, I know that during this time when all of a sudden, your usual stop time at work at 5 o'clock, you look up and it's dark. So think about changing your routine and really maximizing daylight and making people not feel bad about that. Like you said, like when we need a break, take a break, because that's going to only help productivity and help the mental mindset when you can take time to reset. I think Eve Masita was one of the speakers who also said, find the things that you're doing that are creating that burnout and stress. And I know that at the beginning of the pandemic, I was listening to every press conference and reading every breaking news, every headline that was coming in. And finally, I had to turn it off, because those were behaviors that were not, they weren't serving me well. They were only adding to that stress and those morale problems. So think about what some of those behaviors are and how you can stop some of those. So moving to some other questions that we have come in, we talked about cash flow is king and the banks playing a big part in that. And we saw the small community banks really rise to the top as heroes with the Paycheck Protection Program. Are there any recommendations or meaningful relationships with a bank that can support middle market businesses?
Well, I think one of the things we learned, and is those CEOs that had relationships with their banks got to the front of the line. Right? If you didn't have a strong relationship, or you were a small company working with a big bank, they were going to their big customers first. Mm-hmm. So we learned one that is so important, and this is something that we have stressed in our groups, we've stressed in our executive summits, the importance of having that relationship with a banker, having a pre-existing line of credit established. You may not have needed it, but a year ago you didn't think you were going to need it, and the importance of having that. And also, again, this is the power of the group. There were countless stories of CEOs who were frustrated because they couldn't get the attention of their bank, whether for whatever reason, and members of the group were able to point them and connect them to the bankers that they worked with, and how that gave them flexibility. It's also clear that those organizations, and again, this is a trend within VISTAGE, that had their financial ducks in a row, that exhibited fiscal discipline before the pandemic, were best positioned to not just manage through it, but when they got to the window and it was their turn to ask, they had the data, they had the reports to support what they wanted. So those good financial practices that maybe some people got lax because we had this long, slow growth period, but those that maintained those fiscal disciplines of having a relationship, maintaining a line of credit, doing the right things in terms of maintaining your finances and the books around that, they thrived and were able to move more quickly to get that money and take advantage of it.
Great, thank you. Okay, one last question then. Any thoughts on the perception that 2021 might be more difficult from the standpoint that customers are baking COVID into their budgets, meaning they're not spending as much relative to 2020, when in 2020 we had the benefit of the pre-COVID budgets that might not have necessarily been cut yet. So what are you anticipating in terms of budgeting for 2021?
We know some people see the glass half empty, some people see the glass half full. I'm an analyst. I look at it and say the glass is dirty. So I think that's a viable belief and a viable concern. Just as each of us are concerned about our cash flow, the success of our business, and the vendors that we're working with, you have to assume that with your customers. You have to assume that they are going to play cautious. They're going to keep their cards close because we don't know what's going to happen. If we were talking about moving from 21 into 22, well, now maybe we have 3 or 6 months of the new reality to play with, but we don't. And that's why this is such a unique time and such a unique period for planning, because we don't know exactly what next year is going to bring. The belief is that 2021 will be a year of strong growth, 3, maybe 4% GDP as we get back on track, and those industries hardest hit are begin to come back, that the vaccine takes hold, and we get better about this whole thing, but we just don't know. So the best strategy is plan for the worst and hope for the best. And I think that's what prudent leaders are doing, knowing that it's easier to scale up than it is to turn things back, to make sure that your current run rate is one that you can sustain and support, and that as the economy opens up, it's not going to be like turning on a light and the lights are going to come on, hey, we're back. It's going to be slow and steady. And I'll close with this. We've used the analogy of the climb up competition at the Empire State Building that they've had, not this year, but every year before, which was a race from the 86 flights of stairs from the bottom to the top of the Empire State Building. And contestants will tell you that the first 20 stories are easier than any part, that it gets progressively more difficult physically, mentally, and emotionally. And there is nothing harder than the last 15 stories, the last 10 flights of stairs, because you are exhausted, because you're tired. We're all tired, we're all struggling, not just your business, but your customers and the market at large. We will push on, we will push through, we get to the other side. But to answer the question, I think you want to plan for caution. You want to anticipate that your customers are concerned like you are. And again, plan for the worst, hope for the best, but know that we'll get through this and there will be a better day. And I personally believe that by the time we get to mid-year of 2021, we will be on the other side of this virus, and we'll be looking ahead to what ITR tells us will be a sustained period of positive economic growth. And again, those companies and those leaders that can muscle through this period of time, that can keep their company together, that can infuse their culture, they'll be best positioned to capitalize on that first and grow the fastest. So thank you all very much for your time and attention today.
Nope. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to download the Decision Factors report, it's under the handout section, and we'll make sure to send the recording out in the next 24 hours. So be on the lookout for an update with ITR economics for our VISTAGE members in mid-December. Thank you so much. Be safe and be well.